parties. Let's speak to Albie Amankona this morning, political commentator and co-founder of Conservatives Against Racism. Good morning, Albie.
Good morning, Callum.
Lovely to speak to you this morning. Right, let's start then with this impartiality guidance from the government to teachers and to schools. It's worth saying that schools are already required to teach in an impartial way, but this new guidance is advising teachers on how to tackle sensitive issues in a politically impartial way, which includes not using material from groups like we've mentioned, Black Lives Matter and Stonewall. Is this the right way to teach about such important issues as race relations, racism, LGBT rights, for example, in these cases?
I think it's definitely a political decision, and probably the politically right decision for this government. And Nadine Zahawi is trying to start to make his mark on the Department for Education after what some might argue was quite a suboptimal period under Gavin Williamson. And the reason why it might be the right call politically is actually this strategy has been very successful for the Republicans in the US, where a number of Republican-led states have actually banned the teaching of critical race theory, which is kind of the ideology with which Black Lives Matter sits within, from US classrooms. And it's actually even thought to have played a role in the Republicans winning the Virginia governor election. But I would caveat that what British Conservatives need to do is they need to find a positive and unifying alternative to the less divisive narrative on race relations and equality issues. And I'm not sure that we found that yet.
That's interesting. Where should that come from, do you think? Because clearly these are important issues to learn about, to understand about, and there are a lot of perspectives, in some of these cases certainly, there are a lot of perspectives to consider. And even an understanding of the Black Lives Matter movement itself, you could argue, is important to kind of shaping one's own outlook on that movement, for example.
It's very important. I think actually maybe one of the most important things is a better understanding of history, which is why I found it quite interesting that DFE insiders were quite angry about a particular lesson plan about Winston Churchill, whether or not he was a war hero or a war criminal. And I'm not really sure, as a historian, why people found that so offensive, because I was brought up to think that more knowledge was a good thing. And actually, I found British history more interesting once I started learning more about the good and the bad and the ugly of empire, the Industrial Revolution, mass migrations, and about complex historical figures like Churchill. You know, the truth is he was a complex yet excellent man who held some aggressive views on race and empire even for his time, and that's not contested. So yes, he defeated Hitler and saved the values of Western liberal democracy, but he was also a social Darwinist, and he had hierarchical perspectives on race, and he voted against self-rule in Africa, Australia and the Caribbean. So it's really important that we remove our rose-tinted glasses when we're teaching our kids who are going to be the adults and leaders of tomorrow.
Let's go on to this other notable story then. This is the Cabinet Office telling the Metropolitan Police not to publish 300 photos linked to a criminal investigation into Downing Street's lockdown parties. Scotland Yard receiving the request. Apparently, believe it or not, there's concern among aides at Number 10 that publication of the images could harm their reputations. Well, of course they could if they were breaking lockdown rules.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not surprising that Number 10 are trying to stop these pictures from coming out into the public domain for the reasons that you've just said. But broadly speaking, I think in a week where Partygate has rightly taken a backseat with developments, with the evolving situation in Ukraine, the settlement Prince Andrew has come to with Virginia Roberts Giuffre, the recent news about the Prince's Trust and indeed the cost of living crisis, this story in particular reminds us that Partygate has not concluded yet, and that things could still get a lot spicier. And what's particularly interesting in this request from Number 10 for Sue Gray's photographic evidence to be kept secret is that other leadership contenders seem to be implicated in this, because in one picture the Prime Minister is allegedly to be seen captured holding a can of Estrella whilst flanked by none other than the Chancellor Rishi Sunak. This is according to the Daily Mail. So it's interesting that this could have implications for, widely people who are seen to be other leadership contenders as well.
But I mean, this is just the latest in a long line of kind of angles to this story that suggest that we will never ever get access to the full truth of what exactly was happening, and that is scandalous, is it not?
It is definitely concerning, because ultimately, even though I would say in the last week we've started to see signs of Labour's lead, which has gone on for several months now, slipping, one bad picture of 300 and a slew of bad headlines that come from that could reverse that. You know, the Sue Gray report coming out in full, which the Prime Minister has committed to, could reverse all of that as well. So number 10 is really walking on a tightrope with this story still. And the key will be to demonstrate to the public that it was not one rule for us and another rule for you. But from the evidence that we've all seen, that's going to be difficult. And for the Conservative Party, the Prime Minister needs to focus on being an electoral asset in the May elections. And I suspect that if we perform really badly in those local elections, the Prime Minister could be in trouble again. Because if he's neither an electoral asset or able to resolve Partygate in a meaningful way, what reason would Tory MPs have not to send in a letter to the 1922 committee or to support him in a vote of no confidence?
One final story I just want to mention briefly, Albie, for fear of digging up the past in a way that will be just harmful and annoying. But an interesting report, this from the Telegraph this morning. Britons didn't know what they were doing when they backed Brexit, says the European Parliament. MEPs suggest they could have swung the 2016 vote for Remain if they'd warned, often misled, that's the quote, often misled British voters of the risks of leaving. What do you make of this intervention, several years on, of course, from the referendum, from the European Parliament, saying that actually people in the UK didn't actually understand what was going on?
Shock, horror. The European Union thinks Brexit was a bad idea. Look, we were told the sky would fall down over Brexit. And there were lots of predictions from people on the Remain side of the argument and from people in the European Union that lots of these companies would leave London and there would be a talent exodus. And actually, we've seen the fastest economic growth in the G7 over the last 12 months. We've got more people in unemployment now than before the pandemic. London actually remains the top overall destination for financial services worldwide, out-competing New York, Singapore and Paris, which is the EU financial capital. And the talent exodus, it just hasn't happened. Companies have not relocated their headquarters to Europe. In contrast, Royal Dutch Shell has relocated their headquarters from The Hague to London. And that's not to say that there aren't issues to resolve for many small businesses with trade and, of course, the issue with Northern Ireland. And those have got to be resolved. But this idea that Brexit was a disaster, I think it's been proved that it was wrong. So I would like to think that going forwards that we just speak about these issues with a little bit more moderation. And I'm not sure that the European Union has been showing that.
Albie, really lovely to speak to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.